Hello everyone, it's Karina with Karina Loves to Plan. Thank you for joining me in my little corner of the internet where we talk all things planners, fountain pens, and fountain pen inks. And today it is time for another years later review, this time focusing on the Pelikan M800. I have owned my Pelikan M800 since, and now I'm actually looking on my spreadsheet just to double check. I went through actually the M400 and the M600 and then finally landed on the M800 as my Pelikan of choice. And I purchased the green black one back in September of 2023. And then not long after that, I found the brown black on eBay on October 2023. So these are the two Pelikan M800s that I own, and I will not be purchasing any more. I'm happy with the two that I have, but I wanted to take you through basically the measurements, just to review them again, and then review the 8 questions that are important when it comes to looking at the years later review, because I've owned these pens now for over 2 years, and I think I can pretty much answer these very, very well. All right, let's get started. Firstly, if you're not familiar with the Pelikan or the Pelikan M800, the 800 or the 800, the 0 at the end denotes a gold trim finish, and then 805 or the 5 at the end will denote a silver or rhodium trim here. And then the 800s, these ones in particular have a two-tone, and I apologize that you can't see that, a two-tone 18 karat nib, which is just stunning here. So let me just list the measurements and I'll zoom you in here. So just to give you the overall length, when it is capped or closed, essentially it is 141.2 millimeters. When it's uncapped or just the body, it's 127 millimeters. And then when it's posted, it is 166 millimeters. So just using it like this, it's 127 millimeters, but then when you post it, it feels like a very, very big and a little bit back heavy pen. Let's zoom out a little. That's how big this pen looks in my hand. It also feels a little back heavy when you post it, so it's not a pen that I would post. But then when we look at the width of, or the diameter, when we look at the body, the diameter of the body is 13.5 millimeters. And then the diameter of the grip section, which is one of the most important parts to me, the diameter of the grip section is 11 millimeters. So for me, any grip section that's from 10.5 millimeters to about 12 millimeters is very, very comfortable for me. And then I'll also say where I rest my finger, it doesn't get too affected by the threads here. The threads here are not sharp at all, so it's very, very comfortable for my hand. And then when we look at the weight, when we look at the weight capped, it is 29 grams, so a bit of a heavier pen. And then uncapped, or just the pen itself, it is, I say the pen itself, but the body itself, it is 21 grams. So those are the measurements of the pen. And then what I wanted to say is the nib is an 18 karat nib, but I also wanted to say that the filling mechanism on this, it is a piston fill. So those are the basics of the pen. Let's get to the nitty-gritty of these questions. The first question is, are these pens, or is this pen good for a long or short writing session? And for me personally, I feel like this is a more personal question, but for me personally, this is great for long writing sessions because you have such a great ink capacity, but it's also very comfortable. But again, comfort, I feel like, is so subjective. So something that may be comfortable for me may be uncomfortable for somebody else. So again, take what I'm saying here with a bit of a grain of salt, because what's comfortable for me may not be comfortable for you. Next, is this better with wet or dry inks? And I'm going to go back to, and I'll actually have it in this question here, but Pelikan nibs are generally wetter than most nibs. They're generally wetter, but also with the nib size as well, they feel broader than what we would normally associate with an extra fine, for example. An extra fine and a Pelikan feels more like a fine or medium fine when you're looking at Western nibs. So personally, and again, these I feel like are more subjective, but personally, I think this is actually great with dry inks. Because if you want your dry ink to actually run a little wetter, put it in a Pelikan nib, because the Pelikan nibs do run a little wetter. Whereas if you don't mind a bit of a gusher with your wet inks, then certainly put your wet inks in here. But with the dry inks, the nib is wetter, which helps the dry ink. And the ink that I currently dipped this pen in, because it's not actually inked with this, but the ink that I'm using is Diamine Canal Side. Thank you, Ina, for this ink. All right, the next question. Feedback, smooth, what type of nib is it? So I'm gonna have to say, just from doing these figure eights here, it is smooth with a hint of feedback. So it's not like glassy, buttery smooth like a Pilot, for example, but it is definitely smoother than me writing with an Aurora, for example. But then I'll also say that nibs run broader, meaning that this is an extra fine in Pelikan. And if you compare it to just a regular Western extra fine in a Yovo, for example, this is definitely much broader than even a Yovo number 6 extra fine nib. So just be wary of that the Pelikan or the Pelikan is going to run broader than your usual nibs, but it is definitely a very smooth and wet experience. All right. The next question is, do they stain? And what I think this question means is that if you dip the pen in ink, does it stain? Now with this particular one, because it is black, or the resin is green black, this one does not stain. So no, they don't stain. But I would imagine one of the, for example, the M600s, the one that came out with the white rose gold, I imagine that could stain. So I think this would depend on finish if white. But the regular blue black or green black or red black or even the brown black, no, does not stain. And number 5, is this comfortable in the hand? OMG, yes. I remember the first time that I tried a Pelikan M800. It was at the San Francisco Pen Show in 2023. And I remember I went up to the table, and that was one of my goals for the show, was to try this pen and see how comfortable it was. And I was blown away by how comfortable it was, but also how much I loved writing with the nib. And because the pen is heavier, the pen is also slightly wider, it just made it that much more comfortable for me to write with. And I kind of said to myself at the San Francisco Pen Show, I thought, oh, goodness gracious, I'm going to have to buy a more expensive Pelikan because it's just that much more comfortable. I've had the M400, I've had the M600, and unfortunately, those were just too small for my hands and made it difficult and uncomfortable for longer writing sessions. Whereas the M800 for me is just so comfortable. Even where I place my fingers on the threads, I am not bothered by that at all. That is not sharp at all. And with the way that I hold my pen, not uncomfortable around the perlicue here as well. So it's just overall a nicely weighted engineered pen that is very comfortable in the hand. Now, is this an everyday carry, or is this one best left at my desk? Now, for me personally, it is an everyday carry, but that is because I work from home. So these two are basically essentially the same for me. These pens are normally left at my desk. I hardly ever take my fountain pens out with me out and about, and I'm kind of grateful for that because my pens basically don't see much action out in the sunlight. When I work from home, they sit on my desk. They're displayed beautifully on these beautiful trays. But then when I do take them, I'm happy to take this with me as long as I'm taking it in like a lovely rickshaw case where it is protected. But I think because of the price point of this, I would say this is best left at desk. And I'm only saying that as well just because of the experience that I had with my Pelikan M1000. I took that to my therapist, or my children's therapist office, was writing with it, and then I dropped it and broke it. I will have an update on that actually in a little bit here, but because of that experience, I feel weary about taking this out and about with me, and I'm going to leave it at my desk. Now, how are the Pelikan M800s with shimmer inks? Fantastic. I don't have any issues with clogging or hard starts with this. The only issue that I'd have with shimmer inks is if, and I hate naming a brand specifically, but Robert Oster, just because the shimmer particles in that ink are larger, and they, like Robert Oster shimmer inks, clog all of my fountain pens. So generally, if I'm using Diamine shimmer inks for this one, or other ones that have been great, or Wear and Gold, or even Tono and Lims, the shimmer inks for those work beautifully in this nib. And I'm just going to write here, except Robert Oster. And just because of the size of the shimmer particles in here, Robert Oster shimmer inks just don't work in any of my pens, period. All right, and then lastly, my preferred paper. Again, this one I feel like is a more personal question. For me, the preferred paper is always going to be my Tomoe River paper, the 52 GSM, which is what I am currently writing on. This is my Hobonichi A5 notebook. I think the way that the nib glides on this paper is just beautiful, and the way that the paper draws the ink from the pen. All three of these combined makes for such a beautiful writing experience. So Tomoe River paper all the way for me. So that's it for my years later review. I've had a wonderful experience with my Pelikan M800s, and I can't imagine not having these in my collection. I love the brown black. This one I purchased off of eBay, and then the green black I believe I purchased from, looking at my spreadsheet now, I bought it from Atlas actually. So both of these were investment purchases because they are definitely more on the expensive side. The green black was in an extra fine, and then the brown black was in a fine, but I had that ground down to an extra fine cursive smooth italic nib, and I absolutely love the way it writes. I'm so glad I have these in my collection, and they're pens that I'm going to have in my collection for life. I don't think I'd ever get rid of these. All right, but that is it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any questions or have any pens that you'd like to see me do a years later review on, please let me know down below. All right, thank you all so much for watching, and have yourselves a great day.